So here you can see the jar that I chose to make my water pot. And I used some masking tape just randomly on the outside. This will help my fabric grab. Once it's got Powertex on, it won't slide on the glass. If you've got a good label on there, there isn't any need to add your masking tape. Then I've got a nice selection of fabrics, different textures, all natural fabrics. The textures are what really show up at the end when we do our dry brushing. They give us a real advantage if we've got some lovely textures there. Okay, so here we go. Let's get started. I use black Powertex for this project. I like either black or bronze Powertex when I'm going to be adding lovely bright colours. It shows up so well on the dry brushing at the end. Give your bottle a really good shake. Powertex does tend to settle, so if it's been sat on the shelf for a few days, it's going to need a good shake to mix it back up properly. Pour out as much as you need, or you think you need, and put your lid on. We want to preserve the Powertex that's in that bottle, so always put your lid back on tightly. I wore gloves for this. You don't have to wear gloves. Powertex does wash off your hands with soapy water. And now I've got my jar back. I'm going to take my first piece of fabric. Having a bit of trouble deciding which piece to use, I think. I've got such a lovely selection there. I want a reasonable size piece to get started. So I'm going to dip some of this into my Powertex, not the whole thing. Move that around and get it covered in Powertex. We don't want to be filling a big tub with Powertex and then dipping it in and we've got a real big gloopy mess. So I find this is quite a good way to do it. I've got some onto that one end and then I'm going to use what's on there to rub into the rest of the piece. The dry fabric will absorb out any wet Powertex. You can see how wet that is. I'm going to use that dry piece of fabric now to soak it all up. Rub it through, give it a really good massage. It's quite therapeutic here. Move it around in your hands. It'll keep soaking it off your gloves and into itself. You can see here, I'm just checking as I'm going for any white bits. This is another advantage of having the dark coloured Powertex. You can see the bits very easily that you still need to cover. Keep working it in. Give it a squeeze, give it a rub, whatever it takes to push that Powertex through your fabric. Keep opening it out, checking for any white areas. There's still quite a lot on there, but I'm folding it back over, rubbing it on itself, and you can see how it spreads it out. Powertex actually works best, the whole process works best if you don't oversaturate your fabric, but obviously it needs to be covered to do its job. We can't make fabric weatherproof if it's not covered in Powertex. These little bits here, I don't think I've got enough Powertex left in my fabric, so just with my fingers I'm going to add a little bit more onto there, and then I'm going to work that through. I don't want to be dipping back in there because I might pick up too much. That's it, work it through. Have another look, see if there's any more white bits. It's worth spending the time to be thorough and make sure that you've got every little bit covered. And at the same time, not oversaturating your piece of fabric. Turn the piece of fabric over, make sure you've got Powertex right the way through it. It's completely covered. Work it in, work it on itself. You can see there I'm giving that fabric a bit of a stretch. When you stretch it out a bit, that helps the Powertex to be absorbed into the fibres. Just going all the way around the edges again now. Make sure that there's nothing obvious and white. I think I'm just about there now. Totally covered. Now to apply this to my jar. You can see I'm putting it onto some masking tape. That will help me to hold this in place. The fabric will stick to itself very well. But sometimes it's a bit difficult to get it to actually grab onto an upright surface. We're trying to beat gravity at the end of the day. you find you're having difficulty, just put a bit of Powertex onto the glass or the masking tape, because that will really help it grab. A little bit of wet Powertex. Now you can see I'm fiddling with this and I'm getting some nice folds into the fabric. Again, a little bit of Powertex underneath there. I'm bunching up that fabric. The more folds and texture that I can get in there, the better my finished piece will be. You can play with this as much as you like. You've got about an hour before this will start to be too dry to work with. So if you really hated the way it was going on, or you felt it was struggling a little bit, you could take it off and start again. I'm just straightening it out there. I'm getting the jar covered as much as I can. Persevere with it. Sometimes pieces might fall off a bit, but just put them back on. Give them a little press, hold them in place. See, as I've spun that round, I've pulled that fabric off the bottom there, but just put it back on and it will stay put. It's not a definite science, this. It's part of what I love about Powertex, is the randomness of it. There is no right, there is no wrong. Just have faith that it will look beautiful at the end. A little bit of encouragement with a bit of Powertex there. Masking a lot really there for that to just hold on the side. So that bit of Powertex will help me do what I'm trying to do there. Don't rush this. Enjoy it. Fiddle with your pieces of fabric. They're random shapes, so they kind of behave randomly when you put them on the jar. There you are. Some lovely folds in there now. And I've got the rest of the jar to cover. Okay, so on to my favourite part. We're going to be doing the dry brushing and bringing out all that lovely texture. Putting a little bit of varnish onto my surface. You can see it is only a tiny amount. I'm going for the colours of the rainbow. So we're starting off with pink, using burgundy power colour with my varnish, and I'm adding just a tiny little bit of white. The white's a very powerful pigment, so we do it a little bit at a time. Now when I've mixed those two together, I want to make a dryish paint because we're dry brushing, but I've decided that it's a little bit purpley, so I'm adding a little bit of red into there to give it a bit more of a rosy pink. A little bit at a time. I don't want to end up with too much of the colour, and I think you can just see the slight difference that made. Can you see how I'm mixing that colour together? Really mixing it on my brush so that I'm loading my brush up. You can see there. I'm going to wipe a little bit onto my kitchen paper just so that I'm not too heavily loaded on the outer bristles, and then going across the texture there very gently, working very gently to start off with. Got a lot of paint in those bristles, so I don't want to be pressing on too hard too quickly. And go quickly but not heavily, just gently going over all of that texture. You can see it all starts to pop out straight away. Little piece of lace, look how that comes out with the addition of a little bit of colour. Keep stroking over it. The secret to getting good colour on a project like this is to be patient and go over it. Go over it several times. Have a very light touch. Mix dry paint and be patient. Let the colour build up. You've got a very dark base there, so you need to let that colour build up. While I'm working, that paint on my surface is drying out a little bit, but that's okay. You see, I haven't had to add any more paint onto my brush. I just keep going round, and as I'm going, I'm adding a little bit more pressure so that I'm getting the paint from inside the bristles. Where I've gone back into that paint now, because it's dried out, I'm not having to wipe off onto my kitchen paper. I'm quite confident that that paint now is dry enough not to flood into all of the texture. You see how it's building up slowly. Keep going round. There really isn't much left on there now. It's dried out almost completely. But I'm just picking up the scraps of it to keep adding onto my project. This is where I think people tend to go wrong, because they give up too quickly, or they make their paint too runny. Excuse me. It needs to be a dryish paint. It needs to be heavily pigmented. So I'm adding some lilac. I'm mixing straight into there, so my colours will all blend together very well, because they've got the previous colour in them, and that will mean that they'll mix very well. Again, making it dry. Practice makes perfect with this, and you get to the point where you know the feel that you're looking for. Adding in a little bit of aquamarine. I want to deepen that purple for my rainbow colours. A little bit of white again. If I make my colour too dark, it won't show up on the black. Initially, wipe off the outer bristles onto your kitchen paper. And now start adding this colour. And just overlap very slightly into your previous colour. That will help you blend the colours together rather than have exact lines. Bearing in mind that I've got to add all of the colours on here, I'm not going too far with any colour. This is the really fun part of a project. When you start to bring out all that lovely texture, you can see the depth created with the dark base, and then your highlights added with your colour.